The title of this incident is Drunken Deputies. This is being recorded April 23rd, 2020. It occurred at the trailhead to the falls. The date of occurrence was Saturday, Memorial Day weekend, 1973, just east of Mount Hood Kiwanis Camp. Those involved were myself, known as Cleatus, another counselor named Cricket, a counselor named Kodiak, and another counselor named Lizard. The four of us had worked together in one camp or another in the past 2 years. Cricket and I were male counselors. Kodiak and Lizard were female staff members. We decided we'd get together, drink some wine, sit around a fire, and have a chat, have a visit about what we're doing and where we're going this summer. None of us were going to be working in the same camp. We got together that Saturday morning in Cricket's Volkswagen station wagon and headed out. We were heading up towards Mount Hood. The expectation was we'd take a short drive up to the Barlow area, Barlow campground, adjacent to Kiwanis Camp, and camp there for the night and come back on Sunday. It didn't work out quite that way. The weather was bad. It was rainy, drizzly, cold, and what was even worse was the Barlow campsite up there adjacent to Kiwanis Camp was completely full of campers. So we moved on, headed up towards Mount Hood a little further. We checked out every camping area that we could find. They were all in the same situation, full up. We made it as far as Timothy Lake. Of course, that was full. Little Crater, that was full. And about that time, we decided to head back down. We came up with the idea that we could camp at this open area near the falls up by Kiwanis Camp. There'd been a fire pit there for years. Never seen anyone camp there, but it was dry, it was flat, it was near the creek. It had everything going for it. So that's where we ended up. By the time we were setting up camp, the clouds had cleared. It wasn't that rainy out anymore. It was just damp. Gathered the wood, built the fires, got something to eat, continued with the wine. Quite a bit of wine. The bottles were all over the place. We were having a good time. Can't say anything bad about it until it got dark. Shortly after sun went down, we saw some light coming up from the road. I walked down to where the trailhead for the falls meets the road. I was behind some light bushes there watching to see who it was. If in fact it was some other counselors that we'd invited, they found us. I'd point out to where we were going to camp. However, that wasn't the case. The lights approached, the car stopped. Suddenly the car put on its high beams, and there I stood in this thin brush like deer in the headlight. They could see through the brush easily, and there I was. So I walked out, approached the vehicle. The people in the vehicle walked out and approached me. It turned out they were two sheriff's deputies from Clackamas County. They went through the business of asking me who I was, what I was doing there, and everything else. And I told the truth and said there's four of us counselors. We're camping out up here and we're having a visit and we'll be leaving in the morning. That wasn't good enough. Those two sheriff's deputies accompanied me up the trail there 150, 200 feet to our camping area with the tents and the fire, and yep, the wine bottles all over the ground. 3 other counselors there stood up. The sheriff's deputies proceeded to kind of criticize the campground here, that we kind of looked like hippies camping, and I guess they were trying to get us upset so we'd say something or do something, but that wasn't the case. That didn't happen. Just after they began to question us, and we gave them answers, straight, honest answers, they got kind of quiet. The silence continued for a minute or two, and the sheriff's deputy standing next to me seemed to have lost his balance and stumbled a little bit towards the fire, and he backed up. Then a little bit of a breeze shifted through, and I could smell him. Very strong smell of bourbon. I think Cricket must have smelled it too, because he looked at me and then we looked at both of them. And they got this kind of an owly look on their faces, and they were having a hard time standing there. Time went by, just a few minutes. They were starting to back away. Everybody that was around the fire could smell them and knew what was up. They were both drunk, and it was taking effect rapidly. At that point, they mentioned to us it looked like we've got a pretty good place going here, and please be careful. They didn't want to get any reports of forest fire. Bid us a good evening and a fine Memorial Day weekend. They barely were able to stumble their way back down the trail, 150 feet or so, and get in their car. The car turned around ever so slowly, crept down the road about 100 yards, pulled over and stopped. We went back to the fire, built it up, had some more wine, had a good long talk about those 2 drunk sheriff's deputies. I snuck back out before I turned in for the night and looked down the road. And this was a couple hours later, and that car was still there. They had their parking lights on. I guess they were sobering up before they went back. Following morning, I was up at first light, walked on down to see if they'd spent the night. No, they hadn't. They'd gone. At that point, I walked out onto the road, sat on an old road divider, and the sun was out, nice warm on the back. That's where the rest of us ended up in a few minutes, talking about the drunk sheriff's deputies again. Never did hear anything more about it.